Hey friends, tonight we're stepping into something less glamorous and far more grimy. A time of pestilence, punishment, and pottage thicker than your will to live. We're diving into the real medieval life. No castles, no gallant knights, only hardship, filth, and the type of discomfort that makes you grateful for modern plumbing. But before we descend into the mud, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe if this kind of immersive misery somehow soothes you. And tell me in the comments, where are you tuning in from and what time is it there? I love seeing our little global village grow one weary insomniac at a time. Now lower the lights, let a fan hum softly, maybe wrap yourself in something clean and cozy because you won't find either where we're going. Welcome to the year 1325. The good news? You survived the night. The bad news? So did the fleas. You wake up on a mattress that used to be straw but now might be more insect than plant. It's flat, musty, and radiates a scent that whispers barnyard because, fun fact, it was part of a barn just a season ago. No memory foam. No pillows. Just a stiff wool blanket that weighs as much as a small dog and smells like the underside of regret. Washing? That hasn't happened since last snow, and even then only because someone spilled ale on it. A distant bell tolls, not a phone alarm, but the medieval equivalent of a sonic sledgehammer. It's the church reminding everyone that time is real, God is watching, and you have things to suffer through today. Your house? One room. Wooden walls. No glass. No insulation. It's you, your family, some goats, and a generous scattering of vermin sharing air, breath, and bacteria. The aroma? A pungent cocktail of sour beer, wet wool, body odor, and something suspiciously fungal. You convince yourself it's just old soup. You know better. You try to stretch, but your 22-year-old limbs creak like ship masts in a storm. Welcome to middle age, medieval style. Every joint protests like it's already been to war. You swing your legs out of bed, straight into damp, dirt-packed floor. Is that water? Is that chicken droppings? The floor doesn't answer. It only accepts. And privacy? A myth. You share your sleeping space with your siblings, your parents, maybe an uncle with questionable habits, and a few fleas so emotionally attached they might have names. It's not just a bad morning. It's every morning. You've survived the mattress. Now nature calls. Loudly. Urgently. Unfortunately, there is no porcelain throne awaiting your arrival. If you're a peasant, and let's face it, your toilet is a bucket behind the house. And it's full. Again. Uncle Wulfric had one too many fermented root vegetables last night, and now the smell back there is scriptural. You brace yourself, get it done, and then, the final insult, you toss it into the street. Yes, the actual road. You might shout Gardaloo first, a polite way of saying duck for your life, but odds are someone's still getting baptized in last night's dinner. Medieval streets are not picturesque cobbled paths. They're flowing rivers of everything that ever came out of a person, a horse, or a kitchen. Occasionally, they're also where kids play and food vendors set up shop. Enjoy. If your town has public latrines, count yourself lucky. Though lucky is doing heavy lifting here. Imagine a long bench, holes carved into it, strangers on either side, and zero partitions. It's the original social network, but with more smells and far less dignity. Toilet paper? Try moss. Leaves. Scraps of cloth. Straw. Your imagination. Hands even, though hopefully not yours. Handshakes were not yet popular, and now you understand why. And in a castle? Surely that's better, right? Well, not really. You get a garderobe, basically a stone chute that deposits your offerings straight into the moat. It's convenient. Until invaders climb in through it. Yes, that happened. No matter who you are, peasant, priest, or petty noble, medieval toileting is a test of your resolve. It's cold. It's public. It's unspeakably filthy. And it's a daily reminder that hell isn't below us. It's behind the house in a bucket, steaming gently in the morning mist. One misstep on a mossy stone, and you're face first in a puddle of other people's regrets. But hey, you survived the medieval toilet gauntlet. Shouldn't there be a reward? Don't hold your breath. Actually do. Because breakfast in the 14th century isn't nourishment, it's punishment in a bowl. You shuffle toward the hearth, a smoky, soot-blackened pit surrounded by yesterday's ashes and today's complaints. Someone hands you a wooden bowl, warm to the touch, not from food but from the fire it's been parked beside for 3 days. Inside? A heap of pottage. If that word sounds poetic, it's lying to you. This is survival sludge. A soupy mishmash of grains, old onions, turnip shavings, and fragments of what may have once been a legume. It's been cooking for days, maybe weeks, with new ingredients piled on as the old ones surrender to fermentation. It's not a meal. It's a medieval science experiment that no one dares discontinue. Next to it, a hunk of bread so dense it could double as a blunt weapon. It's coarse, grayish, and made with barley, rye, and desperation, often stretched with sawdust, crushed tree bark, or whatever wasn't actively poisonous. You don't slice this bread. You try to reason with it. And to drink? Forget juice, coffee, or anything brewed with love. You're handed a mug of warm, flat ale. Yes, ale at sunrise. Why? Because the local water has more bacteria than honesty at a tax collector's meeting. The beer is weak, barely alcoholic, and the safest liquid in town. Even toddlers sip it from wooden cups, grimacing like tiny alcoholics just trying to survive another Tuesday. Craving a strip of bacon? A slice of cheese? Something redolent of comfort? Good luck. Meat is reserved for feasts, weddings, or miracles. Most peasants see it a handful of times per year, and often they only hear about it. Spices? That pinch of pepper costs more than your clothes. Salt? It's locked up like treasure. So you gnaw at your brick of bread, sip your breakfast beer, and pretend not to notice the tiny bite marks in your porridge, possibly from a rat, or possibly from your cousin. In the end, this meal doesn't energize you. It simply happens to you. Time to get dressed. Not that it makes a difference. You have one outfit, singular, and you've worn it every day for the last 4 seasons. It's made of rough wool or homespun linen, the color of storm clouds and the texture of regret. Underwear? Optional. Hygiene? A fantasy. Your shift itches like hay stuffed into burlap, stitched together by someone with only the vaguest idea of human anatomy. This is not an outfit. It's a slow-moving skin disease. Washing clothes isn't a habit, it's an ordeal. You'd need to lug water from the river, heat it with precious fuel, scrub your tunic against a wooden board with ashes or lye, then dry it in the elusive sun, which shows up about as often as a tax refund. So instead, your clothes are stiff, stained, and fragrant. They reek of sweat, smoke, damp straw, and faint regret. They hold the memory of every meal, every sneeze, every unfortunate encounter with livestock. And shoes? If you're rich, which you're not, you might own something resembling footwear. For everyone else, it's bare feet through mud, manure, sharp rocks, and puddles of God knows what. If you do have shoes, they're leather scraps stitched together with hope, offering about as much protection as 2 wet leaves. The result? Your skin revolts. You itch like it's a full-time job. Fleas and lice nest in your hair and clothes, multiplying like tiny anarchists. Bedbugs burrow into your straw mattress and emerge nightly for a blood feast. Your scalp is a war zone, your neck's been chewed raw, and no one is immune. Even the nobility scratch during supper. Even the monks twitch under their robes. Everyone's a mobile habitat. The question isn't whether you're infested, it's what's currently biting you. Rashes come and never leave. If you're lucky, they stay mild. If not, you get boils, rot, or an infection that turns your armpit into a medieval horror story. No treatment, no creams, no kind hands. You just live with it. Now that you're wrapped in wool, bruises, and bedbugs, it's time to greet the day with a smile. Except you don't, because smiling? That's dangerous. Not emotionally. Dentally. There's no toothbrush. No toothpaste, no floss, no mouthwash. Oral hygiene is a myth whispered by angels. If you're fancy, maybe you chew on a mint twig or rinse with vinegar. But generally, your teeth are on their own. And they're losing. By your mid-20s, your smile looks like something from a Gothic crypt. Rot is rampant. Gums bleed. Molars crumble. Your breath could wilt a rosebush. Sugar is rare but growing among the upper class. If you're noble, congrats, your teeth rot faster. If you're not, you'll grind them down slowly on gritty bread, poorly milled grains, and years of hard chewing. And toothaches? Constant. Some folks drink through them. Others pray. But when it gets truly unbearable, there's only one solution. Yank it out. And who does that? Your barber. Yes, the same man who trims your hair will gleefully remove a molar with tongs, a smile, and zero anesthesia. He'll do it by firelight with the same blade he just used to shave your uncle's chin. And you will thank him, because the pain before was worse. In the Middle Ages, you don't take care of your teeth. You survive them. Hope you like fevers, because without modern meds, a toothache can end in blood poisoning. That's right. In the 1300s, what's a dental inconvenience today could easily become your death certificate tomorrow. One infected molar, one unlucky abscess, and you're done. No antibiotics. No antiseptics. Just a priest and a shovel. And don't expect relief in your love life either. Romance? Try halitosis. Breath so bad it could flatten crops. No one judges your smile because no one has won. You're evaluated based on the size of your land and whether your goat is still breathing. Your mouth isn't a window to your soul, it's a decaying battlefield. And it's losing badly. But there's no time to dwell on that. Time to head out because your real job, the one that grinds your spine to dust, is just beginning. Forget everything you know about work. There's no coffee break, no emails, no ergonomic chair. If you're among the 90% of medieval folk, you're a peasant. Congratulations, you labor from dawn to dusk for someone else's grain, someone else's wealth, and someone else's dinner table. You don't get paid. You get the privilege of survival. Your tools are rudimentary, a splintered hoe, a sickle with more rust than blade, and your own exhausted limbs. Fields are tilled by hand unless you're lucky enough to own an ox. You plant, you weed, you haul water, and all the while your back folds into a permanent question mark. And rest? There's no such thing. Your week is 6 solid days of labor. Sunday's your day off unless there's a storm, a plague, a raid, or your toe turns black and you decide it's time to pray for a miracle. Women? Double the workload. You work the fields and keep house. That means cooking, spinning wool, chasing after 6 children under the age of 8, and scrubbing everything with water that may or may not give you cholera. And if your husband's lice are creeping into your bed, well, that's just marriage in the 14th century. Children don't get childhoods. They get chores. By the age of 5, they're hauling firewood and gathering eggs. No school, no toys. Just the dream of reaching adulthood, which most won't. And if you're not in agriculture, maybe you're a blacksmith or a tanner. That's great if you enjoy toxic fumes, boiling lye, and the pleasant scent of boiled cow hides. You bleed at work, burn your hands, and breathe in soot for the same daily wage, not dying. You get no sick days. You get no forgiveness. You just keep swinging the hammer or digging the ditch, blistered, burnt, and utterly replaceable. Because in the Middle Ages, work wasn't a profession. It was punishment. So your bones are sore, your stomach's hollow, and your head is buzzing from dehydration. Let's talk about the weather. Because in the medieval world, it's not just inconvenient, it's actively trying to destroy you. Start with winter. Your home is a drafty shack. The wind whistles through the walls like it's telling ghost stories. Your windows? There are none. Just holes stuffed with cloth if you're lucky. You huddle by the hearth, but firewood is scarce. Gathering it yourself might get you fined or executed. That's right. Picking the wrong stick from the wrong forest could end with you hanging next to it. So you wear every layer you own, which is still damp from yesterday's rain, and still wake up with icicles for fingers. Your feet are permanently soaked. Your nose might freeze in your sleep. Frostbite? That's just what happens to people who make per-life choices like being born in January. But maybe summer's better? Ha! Not even close. Your house transforms into a slow cooker. No windows, no fans, and your wool tunic becomes a personal sauna. You sweat through everything. You smell like last week's stew and feel like you've been slow roasted by the sun itself. You can't take off your clothes, modesty, sunburn, and biting flies make sure of that. And mosquitoes? They're the background soundtrack of your dreams, buzzing like tiny demons in your ears. Out in the fields, the heat presses on you like a second body. No sunscreen. No wide-brimmed hat unless you made one out of straw and tears. Dehydration sneaks in quietly. Heat stroke? That's just what people call having a bad day. So whether it's winter frostbite or summer skin rot, the only guarantee is discomfort. And through it all, your clothes still itch, your water still smells like goat, and your next brutal shift is waiting. Welcome to medieval climate control. Spoiler, there is none. You're hot. You're tired. You want to splash a little water on your face, maybe feel clean for 5 seconds? Too bad. In medieval Europe, water is your enemy in disguise. That cool stream winding through the trees? It looks clean, sparkling, refreshing, like a fantasy novel cover. Except 20 feet upstream, someone just dumped last night's chamber pot into it. Or worse, a rotting carcass is slowly releasing its secrets into the current. Every sip is a gamble. Every drop could host an army of parasites ready to throw a party in your intestines. That's why people drank ale, even toddlers. It wasn't about getting drunk. It was about not dying. Brewing beer boiled the water, making it safer than whatever trickled through your town's disease-ridden gutters. If you were wealthy, you might sip wine. But even then, nobody trusted the water. It wasn't hydration. It was hazard. And bathing? Medically discouraged. Yep, doctors thought washing yourself opened your pores to illness. So the filth on your body? That was protection. A sacred crust. Washing it off might invite disease. Or worse, desire. Public bathhouses existed but soon gained reputations as places for scandal and sin. The church cracked down. And even if you did want to wash, the process involved fetching water, boiling it, pouring it into a cracked wooden tub, and hoping the lice would take the hint. And don't trust rain barrels either. They double as bird baths, mosquito nurseries, and compost bins for whatever falls from the sky. So no, water isn't refreshing. It's risky. In medieval Europe, even cleansing yourself is an extreme sport. So you took a sip of water or tripped on a cursed rock and now you're dying. Fantastic. In the 1300s, getting sick isn't a detour. It's a cliff. You need a doctor? Sorry. What you get is a man with blood-stained robes, a handful of herbs, and a diploma in creative suffering. Let's start with your diagnosis. You have a fever, a rash, maybe some explosive regret. According to medieval science, that means your humors are misbehaving. Not your mood. Your bodily soup. The 4 humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, must be in perfect harmony or else you're doomed. Got a fever? Obviously too much blood. The solution? Remove some. Enter bloodletting. They'll slice your vein or attach a leech and let it suck until you're pale, dizzy, and suddenly very spiritual. Bonus points if it's done by your barber because yes, the same guy trimming your bangs is also draining your life force into a bucket. 2 services, 1 blade. Feeling melancholic? Clearly an excess of black bile. The remedy? A laxative. Nothing says mental health support like a forced purge while chanting Latin psalms. Break a bone? Too bad. There's no anesthesia unless you count screaming into a rag. Surgery is medieval performance art, knives heated over fire for dramatic effect, not cleanliness. Your wound is cauterized with iron, your cries are drowned out by hymns, and if you survive, it's considered a miracle. Not thanks to the doctor, of course. Just divine pity. They still think diseases float in bad air or leak in through your sins. A stomachache? That's probably punishment for that inappropriate thought you had 3 weeks ago. The cure? Confession and a nice bowl of boiled beetles. And if you don't recover, out comes the priest with a candle and some last rites because the next treatment is burial. But if you do survive, the leech gets a promotion. In medieval medicine, the patient dies, the doctor prays, and the disease quietly wins. After surviving a full day of bloodletting and existential dread, it's finally time to eat. You limp back to your cottage, stomach growling like a cursed dog, dreaming of a hot meal. Surprise! Your dinner wants to finish the job your fever started. First, preservation doesn't exist. No fridge, no icebox, just the desperate hope that cold air or salt will keep things semi-edible. Your meat? It's been aging in the breeze, generously seasoned with flies and probably taste-tested by rats. Bread, your daily staple, is so dense and dark it could double as roofing material. And during lean years, bakers bulk it up with tree bark, dirt, or powdered regret. And if it's rye bread? Say hello to ergot, a delightful fungus that causes hallucinations, convulsions, and possibly death. Enjoy your psychedelic sandwich. Vegetables? Only if they're in season, which basically means root things and wilted leaves. Turnips? Always. They're eternal. In every stew, every meal, every dream. Pottage, that never-ending soup from previous generations, makes another glorious return, bubbling with unidentifiable bits and yesterday's hopes. Fruit? Sure, for 2 weeks in fall. The rest of the year it's either rotten, fermented into sketchy wine, or guarded by the local lord's men. And dairy? It's a gamble. Milk spoils faster than you can blink. Butter and cheese last longer but smell like sins. Still, you eat them. Because it's that or chew the family Bible. Spices? Ha! A pinch of cinnamon costs more than your house. Pepper is treated like treasure. If you're lucky, you get onions and bitterness. That's the seasoning. But food isn't just hazardous to your intestines. It's politically dangerous too. Catch a rabbit in your lord's forest? That's a death sentence. Poaching isn't just a crime. It's a one-way ticket to the gallows. So when you sit down, staring into your bowl of sadness stew, know this: every bite is a dare. But you eat anyway, because hunger is louder than fear. Evening arrives. You've bled, blistered, and possibly hallucinated a conversation with your spoon. Time to relax? Not quite. Because in medieval Europe, rest is a privilege and God is always watching. So is Father Thomas. And Agnes. Agnes lives to tattle. Religion isn't part of your life. It is your life. The church is the government, the school, the social media, and the neighborhood watch all rolled into one. Every day is ruled by prayer bells. Morning? Ring. Noon? Ring. Sunset? Ring. You don't just wake up and go to bed, you kneel into your day and confess into the night. Forget to cross yourself? Sin. Say the wrong thing about a bishop? Sin. Daydream about your neighbor's handsome son in the stables? Double sin. And sin has consequences, not gentle ones. Hell is described in vivid detail: rivers of boiling blood, fire pits, demonic pitchforks, and a front row seat to your own eternal suffering. You hear about it constantly. In sermons, in gossip, in every painting on every wall of every church. The church owns time. Your calendar is full of saints' feast days, fasting periods, and terrifying warnings about divine judgment. Want to get married? Baptized? Buried? You pay the priest. He's the medieval gatekeeper of eternity. Want to read the Bible? Too bad. It's in Latin and you're illiterate. So every evening ends not with wine and candles, but with guilt, prayer, and the low-grade anxiety of eternal damnation. And if you so much as sneeze during Mass, Agnes will absolutely tell everyone it's the devil in your lungs. If you thought the bubonic plague was terrifying, try surviving the church. You can't read the Bible, it's written in Latin, the VIP-only language of monks, bishops, and that one noble brat who quotes scripture just to sound superior. So instead, you rely on the priest to explain God's will. And surprise, it's usually your fault. Your crops failed? Should have prayed harder. Got a fever? Clearly skipped Mass. The solution? More kneeling. Tithes aren't donations, they're mandatory. 1/10 of everything you produce goes to the church. If you grow barley, fork it over. Raise chickens? Hand them the eggs. Have absolutely nothing? That's fine. You still owe spiritually and socially. Eternal damnation now includes a late fee. And then there are the holy days, dozens of them. Don't get excited. They're not for relaxing. They're for fasting, confessing, kneeling, and desperately trying not to enjoy yourself. Joy is considered suspicious. Question the clergy? Congratulations, you're now a heretic. That's a quick path to being tied to a stake. Witchcraft? Even worse. You'll be dunked, burned, or both, depending on which way the wind's blowing and how petty your neighbors are feeling. You go through the motions, chant the prayers, light the candles, pretend your soul isn't quietly crying out for a warm bath and a week off. Because while God might be full of love, the church has a vendetta and your name is definitely on the list. Think medieval peasant life is hard? Now do it as a woman. Same backbreaking work, same famine, same filth, but with extra death, zero rights, and the looming threat of being called a witch because you had an opinion. Or worse, a herb garden. From birth, your fate is fixed. Marry early, birth often, stay quiet, die tired. Education? Only if you're a noble girl sent to a convent where your hobbies include silent prayer and embroidery. Otherwise, you're learning to milk goats and survive childbirth by sheer luck. Marriage? You don't choose. You're fathered as usually by 12, pregnant at 14. Not because of romance, but because someone needed an alliance sealed and livestock exchanged. Your voice in this? Not required. Once married, you're legally your husband's property. Your job is to birth heirs, bake bread, stitch tunics, tend goats, raise 10 kids, bury 4, and smile through the lice. Complain? That's witch behavior. Accusations come with complimentary rope or firewood. Childbirth is a game of roulette where every spin might kill you. No doctors, no anesthesia, just prayers, herbal tea, and the village midwife who once helped deliver twins and survived smallpox. Maybe survive the birth? Congrats. Now you get to work double time with a screaming infant strapped to your back. No maternity leave, no sympathy, no diapers. Just you, the baby, the churn, and the never-ending stew pot. Unmarried? You're suspicious. Widowed? Vulnerable. Assertive? Dangerous. Women who read, asked questions, or owned cats were often accused of sorcery because independence clearly equals evil. Even nuns weren't free. Inside convents, rules were strict. No speaking, no freedom, no leadership. Just silent worship under a male hierarchy that constantly reminded you that your worth was one level below the church altar linen. Being a woman meant surviving quietly. Pain was assumed. Dignity optional. Grace under pressure? Expected. Because even in a world built on misery, women were expected to suffer beautifully. Think your day's done? Time to relax? Not in the Middle Ages. Just when your lice are settling in and your stew's cooling down, the screaming starts. Because violence is the background music of medieval life. There's no real police force. Law and order depend entirely on your lord's mood, and he's still bitter about the goose that bit him in '08. So justice? That's more theater than fairness. Steal bread? Hand chopped off. Gossip too loudly? Get fitted with the scold's bridle, a charming metal muzzle strapped to your head with a tongue clamp. All for a correction, of course. Lied about something? You might have your tongue pierced, split, or simply removed. That'll teach you honesty permanently. And if you're accused of something truly nasty, heresy, witchcraft, or sleeping with the wrong pig farmer's wife, welcome to trial by ordeal. What's that? Oh, just medieval torture disguised as legal procedure. Stick your hand into boiling water to grab a stone. If your skin heals nicely in 3 days, you're innocent. If not, surprise, you were guilty all along. Or they'll tie you up and toss you in a river. Sink and drown? Innocent. Float? Guilty and soon to be very dead. It's like a medieval reality show where the only prize is not being executed in front of the village children. And speaking of executions, they're public entertainment. Hangings, beheadings, floggings, bring the kids, and a picnic. It's educational. Domestic violence? Totally normal. Husbands were expected to discipline their wives. Street brawls happened weekly. Fist fights over bread. Knife fights over pigs. Entire feuds sparked by someone looking at someone else's bucket the wrong way. So yeah, life was short, but at least it was also loud, dangerous, and extremely public. Still think the Middle Ages were romantic? Let's take a final stroll through your glorious peasant life before we close the curtain. You step outside to the sound of a distant bell, not because it's time for brunch, but because someone just died. Again, death is so frequent it's basically a town guest who never leaves. A noble dies? It's a procession. A peasant dies? It's a shovel and a shrug. The graveyard is overcrowded. Bones poke up like unwanted party guests. If there's no space left, they just dig up the older remains, toss them in a charnel house, and plant you in the same hole. Recycling Medieval Edition. And what do you leave behind? No will. No property. Maybe a broken rake and a lice-infested blanket. Your legacy? A name etched into the vague memory of a few villagers who'll forget it by next barley harvest. But even as the soil welcomes another tired body, life grinds forward. The bell rings for evening prayer, the stew keeps boiling, and tomorrow another child will be born in a world of rats, thatched roofs, and dreams no bigger than survival. So, next time you complain about your internet speed or that your oat milk wasn't foamed just right, remember, you didn't wake up with moldy bread, a broken chamber pot, and the genuine fear of dying from stepping on a rusty nail. You have clean water. You have socks. You have a toothbrush. You, dear friend, are living like a king by medieval standards. So maybe, just maybe, give a nod to your past self, the barefoot, malnourished, overworked ancestor who endured centuries of disease and dung so that you could one day sit in a temperature-controlled room watching videos about how terrible life used to be. And now, as the candles of the medieval world flicker out, it's time to travel forward, still in the past, but up a few centuries, where ambition didn't grow in mud but in marble-floored palaces. Next story: before she was Catherine the Great, before she ruled an empire, rewrote the future of Russia, and became a legend wrapped in velvet and intrigue, she was just Sophie. A girl with a long name and an even longer shadow to escape. Born Sophie Friedrich August von Anhalt-Zerbst-Dornberg, try fitting that on a monogram towel, in 1729, her early life was more obscure than opulent. She was a minor German princess from a duchy so small it could be mistaken for a garden plot. But what Sophie lacked in geopolitical clout, she made up for with a mind sharp enough to cut glass and charm that could melt iron. Her mother, Johanna, was less nurturing parent and more social climbing strategist. Think medieval Kris Jenner, but colder. Her father, a military man of Prussian temperament, was more interested in drills than daughters. So Sophie grew up in the shadow of ambition, with little softness, but plenty of pressure. As a girl, she learned to play the game of appearances. Smile, bow, speak when spoken to. But behind the bright eyes and perfect posture, Sophie was watching, always watching. While other girls practiced embroidery, she studied people. She learned where power lived, and more importantly, where it waited to be claimed. And then fate did what it often does for clever women in history. It opened a door no one expected. Russia came calling. But let's pause here, because the next chapter in Sophie's story doesn't start with a crown. It starts with a carriage, a winter road, and a name change that would echo through centuries. In July of that same year, while Peter was away at his summer palace, Catherine launched a bloodless coup d'état. With the support of the Imperial Guard, officers she had quietly cultivated for years, Catherine rode into St. Petersburg in full military regalia. She wasn't a consort anymore. She was a commander, cloaked in green and gold. She stood beneath the banners of Russia, flanked by men who had sworn loyalty not to Peter, but to her. She marched straight to the Kazan Cathedral, where she was blessed by the Orthodox clergy. And in that single symbolic act, she secured divine legitimacy. Catherine wasn't just seizing power. She was being crowned by heaven. Peter, caught off guard and isolated, capitulated almost immediately. Within days, he was arrested, forced to abdicate, and moved under protective custody. He would not live long. Exactly 8 days later, Peter III was dead, officially of hemorrhoidal colic, unofficially, likely strangled in a drunken brawl orchestrated by his jailers. Catherine didn't blink. She mourned him with the grace of a widow. Then she picked up the scepter and never let go. The Empress of all Russia had arrived. But Catherine wasn't content to merely sit on the throne. She wanted to transform it. What followed was one of the most ambitious reigns in imperial history. Over the next 3 decades, she expanded Russia's borders by hundreds of thousands of square miles. She reorganized the government, modernized the legal code, promoted vaccination, built schools, and elevated the arts. Her court became the envy of Europe, a dazzling blend of Enlightenment thought, imperial grandeur, and ruthless realpolitik. She corresponded with Voltaire, invited Diderot to St. Petersburg, and ordered the creation of libraries, theaters, and academies. She reigned not just with force, but with vision. Her reforms weren't always consistent, and they didn't always benefit the peasants. But compared to the medieval chaos she had risen from, Catherine's Russia was a thunderclap of progress. And yet, her enemies never slept. Rumors swirled constantly about her lovers, her ambitions, her morality. She was slandered by foreign pamphlets and whispered about by jealous nobles. But Catherine knew one truth above all. Power doesn't ask for permission. It takes. It builds. It endures. So, she outlived the rumors, outmaneuvered the opposition, and wrote her name into the bedrock of Russian history with a quill sharper than any sword. When she died in 1796 at the age of 67, she left behind an empire larger than any in Europe, a court that glittered like Versailles, and a legacy so complicated, so brilliant, that history still struggles to contain it. She was born Sophie. She died a legend. With the army's loyalty and the strategic backing of her lover, Grigory Orlov, and his politically savvy brothers, Catherine made her move. Draped in imperial robes and riding through the heart of St. Petersburg like destiny on horseback, she was declared Catherine II, Empress of Russia. It wasn't a battle. It was a coronation without cannon fire. The Imperial Guard didn't resist. They saluted. Peter, blindsided and friendless, surrendered in a haze of disbelief. Days later, he was dead. The official cause? A sudden intestinal episode of tragic proportions. The unofficial version, whispered in corridors and scribbled in secret, was assassination. A quiet, efficient erasure. And with that, Catherine became ruler. Not by lineage, not through love, but by strategy, steel nerves, and an intellect sharper than any sword in the empire. A woman not even born Russian had seized the throne of the largest country on earth, and barely ruffled her skirts in the process. But if taking the crown was a masterstroke, keeping it would be an endurance trial. She knew the same nobles who toasted her could turn within a week. Russia had devoured its ambitious before. Catherine needed to shift the narrative, from cunning usurper to enlightened sovereign. The Empress people didn't just fear, but respected, admired, perhaps even loved. So she pivoted. The plotter became the reformer, the schemer, a stateswoman. Her real reign had just begun. Where most rulers would have cemented power with paranoia and executions, Catherine reached for something else entirely: ideas. She didn't want to simply control Russia. She wanted to reinvent it. Her late husband Peter had spent his time playing war with tin soldiers and drooling over Frederick the Great. Catherine, meanwhile, immersed herself in Voltaire, Diderot, and the radical architects of the Enlightenment. Not as a hobby, as a blueprint. She believed in progress even if she ruled by decree. She championed reason even as she sat atop a deeply autocratic system. It was a contradiction, yes, but one she navigated like a dancer gliding across ice. She didn't just read the Enlightenment. She wrote herself into it. Her correspondence with Voltaire lasted over a decade. She called him her champion of truth. He called her the Semiramis of the North. When Diderot fell on hard times, she didn't send condolences. She bought his library and paid him to keep writing. But Catherine was no naive idealist. She understood that quoting Rousseau wouldn't change Russia, codified laws would. So she launched the Nakaz, or Instruction, a legal treatise that read like a love letter to justice. No torture, she urged. Laws should apply to rich and poor alike. Rulers, she wrote, are the first servants of the state. Revolutionary stuff, especially coming from an absolute monarch in a land where nobles treated peasants like livestock with rent payments. Still, she convened the Legislative Commission in 1767, a massive assembly of nobles, clerics, and commoners meant to rewrite Russia's legal system. The commission ultimately dissolved without a new code. But the signal was clear. Russia had entered the age of philosophy, and its empress was holding the lantern. Yet the light didn't always reach far. Catherine's Russia was still feudal, conservative, and deeply unequal. Reform could not outpace reality. She abolished some torture practices, funded secular schools, and built libraries across the empire. But she also tightened the nobility's grip on serfs, a political trade-off she made to preserve loyalty and peace. She was the Enlightenment's champion by day, a survivalist by night. Her throne, after all, rested on bayonets as much as books. Catherine made reforms, but she didn't lose sleep over illusions. She repealed select methods of torture, opened the doors of learning to a wider population, and commissioned libraries as if knowledge itself were a form of fortification. But she also tightened her grip where it mattered. The aristocracy still held their peasants like assets, and she allowed it not out of cruelty but calculation. This was Catherine's paradox. Enlightenment in speech, absolutism in execution. A monarch fluent in Voltaire by candlelight, yet fluent in power behind closed doors. To the salons of Paris, she was a philosopher queen. In the shadowed corridors of the Kremlin, she was a shrewd tactician in pearls and armor. Her reign was less a revolution and more a chess game, one move for justice, another for survival. She didn't try to make Russia French. She tried to make it formidable on Russian terms. Civilization, yes, but never at the cost of control. And her ambitions didn't end at the borders. If Peter the Great cracked open a window to the west, Catherine was ready to dismantle the entire wall and replace it with a gallery of conquests. Where others dreamed of defending, she dreamed of expanding. For her, empire wasn't just about land, it was about permanence. And the map of Europe was far from finished. The Ottoman Empire was first on her list. It wasn't just about land disputes. It was about identity and ideology. Catherine styled herself not just as Russia's ruler, but as the champion of Orthodox Christians languishing under Islamic rule. In her mind, she wasn't invading. She was liberating. From the 1760s through the 1770s, a series of military campaigns erupted, led by hard-nosed commanders like Alexander Suvorov and the charismatic, scandalously competent Grigory Potemkin. Under their banners, Russian troops surged across the steppes, seizing Crimea, dominating the northern Black Sea coast and planting the Russian eagle over long-coveted warm-water ports. It was about more than strategy. These battles rewrote Russia's place on the world stage. With each fortress captured and every coastline secured, Catherine was sending a very specific message. Russia was no longer a peripheral kingdom of half-frozen woods. It was a continental juggernaut. And then she turned west. Poland was wobbling, a fractured commonwealth choked by corruption and foreign meddling. It was ripe for plucking. Catherine, never one to miss an opportunity wrapped in decline, joined hands with Austria and Prussia. Together, they dissected Poland not once, not twice, but 3 times, each slice cleaner than the last. By the time the third partition was complete in 1795, Poland as a nation had vanished from maps, and Russia had absorbed not just land, but culture, cities, and millions of new subjects. It was conquest by consent, or at least by signature. No battlefield drama, just sharp diplomacy and sharper ambition. Catherine didn't just defeat her enemies. She rearranged geography with a quill. But Catherine didn't stop at winning wars. She believed an empire wasn't worth having unless it could be cultivated, literally. She launched campaigns of settlement and infrastructure. German immigrants were recruited to till the soil and raise spires in freshly built towns. Canals were dug, roads laid, markets opened, bureaucrats dispatched like missionaries with paperwork. From the snowy stretches of the Baltics to the sun-baked steppes of southern Ukraine, her Russia was being remade. One edict, one city, one rail-thin colonist at a time. The empire became less a country and more a mosaic, diverse, unwieldy, yet unmistakably hers. And through every report, every dispatch, every whispered rumor of rebellion, Catherine remained engaged. She didn't delegate the future. She dictated it. Her critics, and there were many, called her a tyrant in silk. They said she was drunk on expansion, obsessed with her own myth. And maybe they were half right. But Catherine didn't view her conquests as mere vanity. She believed they were destiny. To her, greatness was measurable in kilometers and cannon barrels. A true ruler didn't just read philosophy. She carved it into the earth. And that was the heart of Catherine's rule. Not merely to govern, but to mold the world into something that would bear her name long after she was gone. Her enemies feared her, her allies admired her, and history couldn't ignore her. Despite her commanding intellect and sweeping reforms, Catherine's reign was just as renowned for what took place in her private chambers. And no, not all of it was whispered with candlelight behind brocade curtains. Her personal life sparked endless fascination, not just within Russia but across all of Europe. Catherine had lovers, not one, not two, but a veritable procession of hand-picked companions. They were often younger, strikingly attractive, and politically shrewd. She made no effort to conceal them. Quite the opposite. Many of her consorts were rewarded with noble ranks, vast estates, and handsome pensions, provided they remained useful, charming, and discreet. Those who didn't, they were dismissed with graceful efficiency and, more often than not, a parting gift wrapped in titles. The most significant of these men was Grigory Potemkin, a man whose mind was as formidable as his mustache. Their relationship transcended court gossip. It was a merger of power and passion. They didn't simply share a bed. They co-authored chapters of Russian history. Some speculate they even wed in secret, their bond too complex for ceremonial labels. Together, they directed military strategy, oversaw colonization efforts, and reimagined Russia's southern frontier. Yet Europe couldn't look away from the scandal. Anonymous leaflets and bitter cartoons depicted her as a woman ruled by desire rather than reason. And after her death, these tales grew even more grotesque. The most infamous, entirely fabricated, was the obscene rumor involving a horse, a piece of malicious fiction designed solely to smear her name. It has no basis in truth, but persists like mold in forgotten corners of history. So why the fixation on her affairs? Because Catherine shattered expectations. She didn't fit into the narrow roles assigned to powerful women. She wasn't a tragic queen, nor a virginal saint. She was something else entirely, a sovereign who wielded both scepter and sensuality without shame. Her views on love and sexuality were surprisingly modern. Catherine believed joy was not incompatible with duty. She didn't see passion as a threat to leadership. If anything, she saw it as a dimension of being alive. While male monarchs took mistresses and were called virile, Catherine chose lovers and was branded immoral. Her critics called her reckless. In truth, she was deliberate. Most of her romantic partners weren't just eye candy. They were politically valuable. Trusted men with military experience, diplomatic skill, or administrative talent. When their usefulness waned, she retired them with dignity and sometimes even a promotion. In many ways, Catherine managed her love life like she managed her empire, with ruthless elegance. And then, just as things seemed relatively stable, the empire trembled beneath her feet. In 1773, a man named Yemelian Pugachev emerged from the shadows of the steppe and declared himself to be Peter III, Catherine's very much deceased husband. According to him, he hadn't been murdered after all, but had miraculously escaped and was ready to reclaim his throne. The claim was preposterous. Anyone who'd seen Peter during his short-lived reign could tell the difference. But facts didn't matter. Pugachev wasn't selling truth, he was selling hope. And the downtrodden masses were desperate buyers. For Russia's millions of serfs, overworked, abused, and crushed under generations of feudal oppression, Pugachev's rebellion was a torch in the dark. He promised freedom from bondage, reduced taxes, and land of their own. His uprising swept through the Volga region like wildfire. What began as a scattered revolt quickly became a full-blown insurgency. Towns fell. Officials were slaughtered. Noble estates were razed. Peasant militias formed overnight, many convinced they were fighting to restore a just and rightful czar. Catherine, in the safety of her palace, watched with cold calculation. This wasn't just a threat to the throne, it was a challenge to the entire imperial system. She responded not with panic, but with precision. Troops were dispatched. Loyal generals mobilized. The rebellion had to be crushed, not just militarily, but symbolically. For nearly a year, Pugachev played czar. He issued decrees, held mock courts, and inspired thousands. But in the end, loyalty, discipline, and superior firepower won out. He was captured, caged, paraded through Moscow like a carnival beast, and then publicly executed. His body was quartered, his memory turned to ash. Yet the scars lingered. Pugachev's uprising was a stark reminder of Russia's fragility. It exposed the deep fractures beneath the gilded surface of Catherine's reign. If the Empress ever doubted the volatility of ruling a nation stretched across 11 time zones and hundreds of ethnic groups, she didn't anymore. The rebellion didn't just shake the countryside. It reshaped Catherine's policies. In its aftermath, she tightened control over the serfs, wary of another populist spark. At the same time, she doubled down on centralization, bureaucracy, and information gathering. If rebellion was born of ignorance and despair, she would respond with order and oversight. Catherine had survived a civil war dressed in myth and fire, and in the ruins of that rebellion, she refined her rule. Tougher, sharper, wiser, the philosopher queen had become the Iron Empress. His words ignited a wildfire along the banks of the Volga, especially among Cossack peasants and the old believers clinging to tradition. In an era when the chasm between landowners and serfs had become a gaping wound, his promises rang out like a gospel. The Pugachev uprising would become the most massive peasant revolt Russia had ever seen. Village after village fell into rebel hands. Fortresses were breached. Aristocrats were dragged from their manors and executed. For a few breathless weeks, it looked as though the bones of the empire might snap beneath the weight of rebellion. Catherine felt the tremor. This wasn't a battle against foreign invaders she could outmaneuver with treaties and cavalry. It was an insurrection fueled by the fury of her own people. But the Empress did not falter. She countered swiftly and decisively. Professional troops were deployed, loyal generals given full authority. By 1774, the rebellion had been crushed. Pugachev was captured, paraded through Moscow in a cage like a beast, then beheaded in public. His death wasn't just a punishment. It was a message carved in blood. Defiance would be annihilated. Afterward, Catherine took stock. Her once idealistic visions of emancipating the serfs dissolved quietly in the aftermath. The uprising had exposed the brittle underlayer of enlightenment in a country still chained to feudalism. She tightened her grip on the nobility, granting them broader control over their peasants in return for loyalty and silence. It marked a shift. The Empress who once quoted Voltaire now favored order over idealism. Reform didn't vanish, but it slowed, became cautious, strategic. State surveillance intensified. Dissidence, even unspoken, was to be snuffed out before it could spread. Pugachev was dead, but the echo of his revolt remained. A ghostly reminder that inequality, left unchecked, could become a ticking bomb beneath any crown. By the time Catherine approached the twilight of her reign, she had become the longest ruling female sovereign in Russian history. 34 years on the throne had reshaped the empire and herself. Russia had grown dramatically. Over 200,000 square miles were added under her rule, including Crimea, large portions of Poland, and the Black Sea's northern coast. These weren't just territorial victories. They were geopolitical chess moves, gaining warm water ports, strengthening trade routes, and asserting Russia's muscle in a skeptical European arena. But Catherine's imprint extended far beyond the battlefield or the map. She transformed Russia's cultural soul. She laid the foundation for the Hermitage Museum, gathering an art collection rivaling Europe's best. She engaged with Enlightenment titans like Voltaire and Diderot, exchanging letters, ideas, and flattery. Her court became a glittering hub of intellect, art, and elegance. In a land often dismissed as cold and backward by the West, Catherine forged a new image: Russia as refined, powerful, and undeniably modern. She launched educational reforms, opened schools for girls, encouraged printing, and personally received the smallpox vaccine to set a scientific example for her people. And yet, there were contradictions. While she championed Enlightenment values, she entrenched serfdom further into Russian soil. Her reforms often remained surface deep, designed to modernize the empire's face without disturbing its foundation. Serfs remained property. Power remained centralized. Progress, though real, had limits. But through it all, Catherine never let go of the reins. She knew power was never truly granted. It had to be seized, sculpted, and constantly defended. She ruled not by divine right, but through sheer intellect, bold ambition, and political mastery. They called her many things: tyrant, seductress, reformer, usurper. But above all, she was formidable. When she died in 1796, Russia stood as a colossus, wealthier, vaster, and more respected than it had been in centuries. Her throne was stable, her legend immortal. Catherine the Great didn't simply wear the crown. She molded history with her bare hands. And in doing so, she crossed the line from ruler to myth. For all her reach, reforms, and historical force, Catherine the Great remained, at her heart, a woman steering an empire in a world designed to shut her out. Behind the portraits draped in velvet and the sweeping decrees inked in gold was someone who knew just how fragile her throne really was. She wasn't Russian by blood. She didn't inherit her power. She seized it. And in a kingdom that barely tolerated a woman in power, she didn't just survive, she rewrote the rules. Catherine refused to be ornamental. Her intellect was a machine constantly in motion. She devoured books, crafted policy, studied state reports, and orchestrated a court filled with alliances, egos, and knives hidden behind smiles. Her days were long, structured, and relentless, part monarch, part manager, part mythmaker. And yet, behind the palace walls, there was solitude. She was often surrounded by suitors, statesmen, and scholars, but in her writings, she confided in no one fully. Her son Paul remained distant, distrusted, and ultimately excluded from matters of state. Catherine feared that if he inherited the empire, everything she'd built would unravel. The deepest bond of her adult life, with Prince Potemkin, had cooled into camaraderie long before his death in 1791. But when he passed, it left a silence even her libraries couldn't fill. Catherine was a master of self-image. She shaped her legend with purpose. Empress of Enlightenment, patron of the arts, mother of the people, defender of Russia. She painted herself in power, both literally and symbolically. But underneath the iconography was a woman who had faced exile, public scandal, betrayal, and the edge of revolution, and still never loosened her grip. When she died in 1796, she left behind not just a stronger empire, but a long shadow of unanswered questions. Could she have broken the chains of serfdom? Did her love of progress stop at the gates of political necessity? Was she an idealist forced to compromise, or a realist with a golden pen? History gave her the title she never claimed, the Great, not because she was perfect, but because she ruled unapologetically in an age where women were meant to remain quiet shadows behind powerful men. Catherine didn't inherit her crown. She took it and rewrote what it meant to wear one. Unlike most Maya tombs, hers was hidden by intent, sealed away beneath stone and silence, untouched for over 1,000 years. No looter's hand had disturbed it. No chronicler had etched her name into history. It was as if she had been deliberately erased or protected, not just laid to rest, but consecrated, not remembered through words, but through reverence, through ritual, through color, through mystery. What chilled the archaeologists wasn't the opulence, though it was undeniable, nor the sheer stillness of the chamber. It was the dust, a thick, smothering layer of powdered cinnabar, a mercury-rich mineral ground into vivid red powder. It blanketed everything: the sarcophagus, the offerings, the walls. Her bones clung like blood turned to ash. The tomb glowed crimson in the dim torchlight, as if she had been embalmed in sacrifice. To the Maya, this was no decoration. Cinnabar was sacred and dangerous. Its red hue wasn't just beautiful, it was divine. Red was the color of life force, of birth and death, of the rising sun and the last spilled drop of blood on the altar. It wasn't ornamental, it was transformational. Covering the dead in cinnabar was an act of spiritual alchemy, not to preserve the body, but to prepare the soul. Because in Maya belief, death was not an end. It was a portal, a migration of spirit through layers of existence, from the mortal world to the deep, chthonic corridors of Xibalba, the Maya underworld. The Red Queen, whoever she was, had not been buried. She had been sent, prepared for deification, transfigured by pigment and silence into something beyond flesh. And yet, there is another truth beneath the beauty, one the Maya may not have known, or perhaps embraced knowingly. Cinnabar is toxic. Prolonged exposure causes tremors, hallucinations, madness, death. They may not have understood mercury on a molecular level, but they understood power, the volatility, the danger, the sacrifice. To saturate her remains in this sacred poison was to proclaim her untouchable. Sacred, more spirit than human. Only a handful in all of Palenque had been buried this way. One of them, Pakal the Great, the revered king whose pyramid towers over the ancient city. His bones, too, had been dusted red. This single, shared detail whispered across centuries. Was she his queen? His mother? His spiritual equal? No glyphs named her. No stele told her story. But the burial spoke louder than words. Her skull rested on jaguar skin, a symbol of night, of royalty, of the shaman's transformation. Around her were bone needles, obsidian blades, tiny jade figurines, tools and tokens for rituals, rites, and perhaps final prayers. Each object placed with purpose, each one a whisper. Her tomb was not filled with noise, but with sacred geometry. A story etched in the language of offering, of shadow, of sacred color. She had not been silenced. She had been encoded into myth. And all around her, in that dim red glow, shimmered jade, shell, obsidian. The room was still, but nothing was dead. These were not adornments. They were companions, meant to follow her across the threshold into the next realm. Jade necklaces rested along her collarbone, still gleaming as if alive. Their green was not mere color, it was cosmic resonance. Jade was breath. Jade was maze. Jade was the jungle's heart and the god's blood. Only the exalted were buried with it. She had been covered in it. Neck, wrists, ears, crowned and encircled. This was not the burial of a consort. This was the burial of someone chosen, someone holy. And then the mask, placed delicately over her face. It was carved of solid jade, its contours shaped not to preserve, but to protect. A face meant to endure the crossing, to shield her from the chaos of the underworld, to signal to the spirits. This one does not belong to death. She belongs to the divine. The Red Queen's tomb was not just a resting place. It was a spell, a shrine, a transmission. In life, her name may have been forgotten, but in death, she became something more. A riddle wrapped in bloodstone, a sovereign of silence, and the eternal mistress of the red veil. Unlike the gleaming golden masks of Egyptian pharaohs, this one whispered instead of shouted. Her face, recreated not in opulence, but in reverence, was a mosaic of jade. Tiny green tiles meticulously placed to follow the gentle slope of her brow, the arch of her cheek, the quiet power of her closed lips. It was not made to impress the living. It was crafted to guide the dead. This was no mere decoration. It was a talisman, a sacred visage meant to preserve her identity as she crossed into the next world, to shield her spirit in the dangerous passage through Zabalba, and to present her to the gods not as flesh, but as divinity. With it, she became eternal. Scattered beside her bones were more than ornaments. Bone needles, obsidian knives, intricate shell relics, each one a whisper of her story. Were these instruments of ritual, tokens of power, or the ceremonial tools of a priestess or royal healer? One slender bone pin bore an etching, faint, almost erased by time, but deliberate. A fragment of a voice now swallowed by centuries. At her feet, ceramic vessels stood like silent sentinels, still sealed, still full, their contents long turned to dust, but once filled with offerings. Food, fermented drink, sacred incense, sustenance for the soul's long voyage through the shadows. These were not treasures of vanity. They were provisions for a cosmic journey, tools of survival for the soul's rebirth. And that's what sets this tomb apart. Unlike the overstuffed crypts of gold-clad monarchs or weapon-filled sarcophagi of warrior kings, her resting place was intimate, austere, but intentional. There was no pomp, no excess. Every object held weight. Every placement was a message, a map drawn in ritual and color, guiding her through death not toward darkness, but toward ascent. Through these artifacts, we glimpse how the Maya understood mortality, not as a conclusion, but as a transition of power. This queen was not laid to rest to be forgotten. She was being prepared to become something more. And yet, in all the splendor of her burial, one absence remains most haunting. There is no name, no glyphs carved into stone, no title inscribed beside her remains, no inscription to anchor her to history's written scroll. She had power, she had status, she had ceremony, but who was she? From the moment archaeologists lowered themselves into her crimson sanctuary, the search began. The prevailing theory points to one name, Tiziakbu Ajah, known to us as Zakbu Ahau, consort to Kinich Jenab Pakal, remembered today as Pakal the Great, the most iconic ruler of Palenque. Zakbu was no passive queen. Born of noble blood, she entered Palenque's royal line through marriage and bore at least 3 sons, all of whom would rise to prominence. She appeared in inscriptions during her husband's reign, not just as consort but as participant in state rituals, a woman whose presence solidified the legitimacy of a dynasty. And there's the proximity. Her tomb lies only meters from Pakal's own grand crypt beneath the temple of the inscriptions. Too close to be chance. The pairing feels deliberate, an eternal reunion between sovereigns. And then there is the cinnabar. Only 2 burials in Palenque were bathed so fully in its sacred red. Pakal and the woman now called the Red Queen. Coincidence seems unlikely. Still, when DNA testing was conducted, the results offered no confirmation, no maternal link between the two. But absence of shared blood doesn't disprove marriage. Marriage is not a genetic bond, but a spiritual and political one. And so the mystery deepens. Could she have been Sak-Kuk instead? Pakal's formidable mother, who ruled as queen in her own right before passing the crown to her son? Or was she another, a high priestess, a sister, a matriarch lost to history's erosion? There is no conclusive answer, but the weight of evidence continues to tilt toward Tiziakbu Ajah, a mother of kings, a queen by title, a sovereign by ritual. Perhaps her anonymity wasn't an oversight, but a choice. The Maya believed that names were not the only way to live on. In their cosmology, it was ceremony that immortalized. It was pigment and placement, not paper and ink, that carried memory forward. And so she lingers between legend and lineage, between reverence and obscurity, remembered not in alphabet, but in scarlet powder and the deep hush of limestone chambers. To truly understand her, we must first understand the world that made her. For in the Maya world, royal women were not shadows. They were architects of lineage, keepers of knowledge, and vessels of divine blood. Power was inherited, yes, but it was also embodied. Women like the Red Queen weren't just consorts. They were co-rulers, spiritual leaders, and anchors of political continuity. Zakuk proved it. When the throne stood vacant after a dynastic crisis, she didn't fade into the background. She ascended. She ruled in her own name until her son, Pekel, was old enough to lead. She wasn't a placeholder. She was a monarch. And in the case of the Red Queen, whether she was Tiziakbu or Zakuk, she stands now as a symbol of everything Maya women could be, remembered not through what they said, but through what they shaped. Would you like me to continue the next part, expanding on Maya women's influence, or the spiritual journey of the dead into Xibalba? She wasn't a placeholder warming the throne until a man could rise. She was a sovereign in her own right, issuing commands, directing sacred builds, shaping the future of her lineage through calculated authority. Without her presence, Palenque's golden age may never have materialized, and she was far from an exception. Across the Maya lowlands, in cities like Yaxchilan, Naranjo, Calakmul, steely and painted murals reveal women not in the shadows, but at the center of political life. They are carved into stone mid-ritual, cloaked in serpent-feathered headdresses, gripping scepters and bloodletting blades, not as accessories to kings but as rulers, mediators, and divine conduits themselves. Their names, once etched proudly in glyphs, now drift like half-heard chants through crumbling temples. When the Spanish arrived, they brought more than steel and fire, they brought silence. Their eyes refused to see the sacred power women once held. And so centuries buried what murals once proclaimed. But the stones still speak, and they recast the Red Queen not as an enigma, but as part of a lineage of royal women who negotiated power with the gods and held empires in the folds of their robes. She may have died unnamed, but her burial says otherwise. Rich in jade, bathed in sacred red, entombed beside Palenque's greatest ruler. Her legacy, it seems, was never meant to be written in language. It was meant to be felt. Her jade mask wasn't jewelry. It was her identity crystallized, a protective shell for the soul, a silent proclamation that she mattered in life, in death, and in cosmic memory. Her bloodline may have been the ceremonial thread that bound Palenque's dynasty together. In Maya culture, a queen was more than a wife. She was often the axis of royal legitimacy, a channel through which the divine spoke, a presence whose blood held the weight of gods. The Red Queen's burial doesn't whisper. It declares that this was someone sacred, a keeper of cosmic cycles, a partner in spiritual order, a woman of thunderous silence, and her burial site tells its own story. She wasn't laid to rest in some forgotten corner of the city. Her body was found within Temple 13, modest from the outside, but intimately close to the towering temple of the inscriptions, where King Pekel lies. Proximity meant purpose. The Maya didn't build randomly. Every angle, every alignment, every layer of stone had cosmological intention. These temples were maps of the heavens, time machines built of limestone. Temple 13 rises humbly next to Pekel's grandeur, but its core hides something profound, a sealed chamber, untouched for over 1,000 years, discovered by chance or fate, accessed only through a steep, narrow descent. The pathway spirals downward, echoing the soul's journey into the Maya underworld. It is not theatrical. It is sacred. The tomb itself is unadorned. No story carved into walls. No murals to guide the eye. But the silence is not empty. It is ritual. It tells us that this place was not for visitors. It was for transformation. And at the very heart of this stone womb lies her sarcophagus, cut from limestone, positioned with deliberate precision. It mirrors the cosmic stone coffin of Pakal, but where his lid shows glyphs and galactic ascension, hers is inward, solemn, blood-soaked in cinnabar, focused not on display but on transition. And yet, architecture whispers truth. Her tomb aligns east to west, the path of the sun, the rhythm of life and death, of descent into night and the promise of morning. A message written not in letters, but in orientation. The tomb is compact, but it pulses with power. Everything about it feels personal, not grandiose, but deeply intentional. The Maya believed temples connected 3 layers of existence: sky, earth, and the underworld. To be buried within one was to pass through all 3. The Red Queen wasn't laid to rest. She was lifted into eternity, her bones cradled in stone, her essence suspended in sacred red, her story built into the very geometry of the temple around her. She doesn't speak through inscriptions. She speaks through stillness. And in that silence, the Maya left a message. She mattered. It wasn't just spiritual. It was political, cosmological, meticulously ritualized. Every burial among the Maya elite was a sacred script, performed in layers, woven from myth, memory, and divine engineering. To die was not to vanish, it was to pass into narrative. And the Red Queen's passing was no exception. For the Maya, the underworld wasn't a place of rest. It was Xibalba, a nightmarish maze etched deep beneath the earth, where rivers flowed with blood and skeletal gods whispered riddles and torment. It was darkness personified, guarded by lords of death who tested each soul's worth. And the only way through was preparation. The Red Queen's burial checked every sacred box. Her body was drenched in cinnabar, not merely as a pigment but as alchemy. Mercury and sulfur ground into red dust, clinging to bone and spirit, marking her as one of the chosen few. The stone tomb that embraced her was not just protection, it was a gateway. Her offerings, meticulously arranged, spoke not of farewell but of provisioning. This was not a resting place. This was launch. And there's more. Among the treasures that surrounded her were bone needles and obsidian blades, tools that may have served dual purposes. Instruments for ritual bloodletting in life, or symbolic tools placed at her side to empower her soul's journey. In Maya theology, auto-sacrifice, the offering of one's own blood, was an act of cosmic balance. It was the heartbeat of kings, the breath of queens. Through blood, the sacred will turned. To include these tools was to ensure she crossed into Xibalba with power, memory, and command. At her face, the jade funerary mask, a masterpiece of mosaic precision, was not art. It was identity preserved. The Maya believed that the face was the soul's mirror, and without it, the gods might not recognize you. This mask was her passport, her proof of life, her spiritual fingerprint. Surrounding her sarcophagus, ceramic vessels sat like silent sentinels. Their contents long vanished, but their purpose still whispered. Cacao for energy, maize for life, pulque for vision, water for the journey. Each a metaphysical ration, placed with reverence to sustain her through the cosmic descent. Other items held deeper resonance. Stingray spines, linked to blood rituals and shamanic rites. Shell trumpets, tools of sonic prayer, used to call ancestors or awaken sleeping gods. Each artifact was a message, each placement a sentence, and the full tomb a paragraph in a story of rebirth. To the Maya, death wasn't loss. It was planting. The body became seed, and the tomb became soil. From that sacred ground, transformation could occur. And when the departed were royal, that transformation was not only individual, it was cosmic. The Red Queen wasn't being buried. She was ascending. As with kings, queens were believed to walk the line between human and divine. In life, she may have been blood of rulers. In death, she became essence of cosmos. The color of blood marked her flesh. The architecture aligned her body with stars. The gifts at her feet armed her soul for a journey few would dare imagine. And just beyond her silent tomb, a few measured steps away, rests her counterpart, Kinich Jenab Pakel, Pakel the Great, buried beneath the soaring temple of the inscriptions, an icon of death and cosmic rebirth. His tomb is famous, rightly so, engraved with his descent into the underworld, riding the world tree, a fusion of ruler and god. His sarcophagus lid tells a story of transcendence, of solar resurrection. But the Red Queen's tomb tells its tale through absence. No glyphs, no narrative carved in stone, just proximity, just intention. Her tomb within Temple 13 was placed not randomly but in dialogue with his. The Maya positioned their monuments with the stars in mind. Every angle, every axis was sacred. For the Red Queen to rest beside Pakel, their tombs nearly touching, speaks volumes. They were paired not only in life, perhaps, but in death. Two sides of a divine cycle. Pakel, the solar king, the light that falls, journeys beneath the world, and returns at dawn. The Red Queen, perhaps, the lunar force, the mystery, the rhythm, the other half of celestial truth. Where he burns, she reflects. Where he descends with fire, she glides through shadow. Together, they form the full cosmic arc. Sun and moon, life and death, masculine and feminine, balanced in stone. And that's where the Red Queen becomes legend. Not because we know her name, but because the Maya buried her as if she mattered to the gods. She may not have left behind a story in words, but the architecture, the offerings, the silence, they wrote a story anyway. One we're still deciphering. One that says, she ruled, she was sacred, and she returned to the stars. Together, they embodied a cosmic duality. Masculine and feminine, king and queen, sun and moon, order and ritual. In Maya belief, rulership was never meant to be singular, it was relational. The universe moved in balance, and so did the court. A king alone did not hold the cosmos in place. It required the queen, not behind him but beside him. By placing the Red Queen in a temple just steps from Pals, the Maya weren't simply honoring a marriage. They were preserving a cosmic partnership, a sacred geometry of power. Their tombs face each other like quiet echoes, not just of human love, but of divine order. In life, they may have ruled as sovereigns. In death, they remain aligned as symbols. Two beings wrapped in cinnabar and stone, resting in silence yet speaking across the centuries. A stillness that pulses with intention. A shared afterlife, sealed in sacred architecture. One of history's most profound and haunting silences. And though her name was never carved, the Red Queen of Palenque refuses to fade. She endures, not as a forgotten figure shrouded in dust, but as one of the most enigmatic and powerful women of the ancient world. Her tomb, untouched for over 13 centuries, now whispers across time. It asks more than it answers. Who was she? What power did she hold? Why was she honored so deliberately and buried so close to the greatest king of her city? She remains nameless, yes, but not voiceless. The richness of her offerings, the deliberate architecture, the sacred symbolism of her jade and blood-red burial, all these speak of someone with real stature. She was not merely a consort. She was a woman of substance, a spiritual anchor, a royal force. Today, the Red Queen forces us to widen our lens, to remember that in the ancient Maya world, women weren't passive shadows. They conducted rituals. They governed dynasties. They brokered peace and bloodlines alike. While kings like Pal have long held the spotlight, the Red Queen's resurrection reminds us that history was never his story alone. It was hers too. She redefines power. She shifts the narrative. She expands the myth. And her legacy, perhaps most extraordinary of all, is not in what she left behind, but in what she continues to inspire. Every bead of jade, every grain of cinnabar, every silent glyphless wall of her tomb becomes part of a larger story now unfolding, through archaeology, through art, through the voices of those who seek to understand. She teaches us that history is not a collection of final answers. It is a living pursuit, a conversation with the dead, a puzzle we assemble together piece by piece, breath by breath. The Red Queen lies wrapped in red, the color of sacrifice and life, of blood and transformation. Her face, once masked, now looks out at us through the lens of science, of wonder, of imagination. She may remain anonymous, but she is not forgotten. She may have ruled a kingdom in life, but in death she governs something larger. She rules the human imagination. Her tomb was sealed in stone. Her name was never spoken aloud, and still somehow she speaks. Not far from where the Red Queen redefined silence, another woman, centuries later and thousands of miles away, would redefine pain. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in the vivid borough of Coyoacán, then still a quiet village outside the restless heart of Mexico City. Her childhood home, the famous Casa Azul, the Blue House, was a riot of color and contradiction, and would one day become her sanctuary, her battlefield, and the museum of her memory. Frida was the third of 4 daughters, born to Guillermo Kahlo, a Hungarian-German photographer, and Matilda Calderon, a devout Catholic of mixed indigenous and Spanish descent. Her parents were a study in contrast. Guillermo, intellectual and reserved, Matilda, stern and devout. Frida would inherit her father's sensitivity and artist's eye, but also her mother's volcanic will. Even as a child, Frida burned brighter than her surroundings. Curious, sharp-tongued, full of questions most adults would rather avoid. She read endlessly, drew obsessively, and lived vividly. But at just 6 years old, her momentum was interrupted. Polio struck her right leg, leaving it thinner and weaker, the first shadow of many to come. Would you like to continue directly with the Frida Kahlo narrative in this same cinematic tone? A physical difference she hid beneath flowing skirts, but never allowed to define her. The polio left its mark. One leg thinner, weaker, but her will only grew stronger. Isolated during her long recovery, Frida turned inward. While other children played, she was confined to beds and shadows, her world quiet but vivid. And in that solitude, her bond with her father deepened. Guillermo Kahlo, A photographer, a few words and steady presence became her companion and her mirror. He encouraged her to stay active, to ride bicycles, to fight the stillness with strength. He also taught her how to observe, how to frame the world with a photographer's eye, a skill that would later bleed into her canvases like ink into fabric. Most girls her age were being shaped for marriage. Frida was shaping herself for something entirely different. Her ambition to become a doctor. At 15, she enrolled in Mexico's National Preparatory School. A bold move, considering only 35 of the 2,000 students were girls. But Frida wasn't just another student. She was volcanic, brilliant, provocative, and impossible to ignore. She wore tailored suits and traditional Tewana dresses. She smoked. She cursed. She challenged professors. She dared to speak when others whispered. At school, she joined a group of rebellious intellectuals known as the Cachuchas, students who met after class to debate art, revolution, and poetry with fire in their veins and irony in their smiles. Frida thrived among them. She wasn't just drawn to politics. She danced with it. She poked at dogma. She questioned gender roles. She devoured books from Marx to Dostoevsky. Long before anyone saw her art, Frida was already carving herself into a cultural force, sharp-tongued, poetic, and politically awake. But all that, the classes, the friendships, the dreams of surgery, came crashing down on September 17, 1925. It was supposed to be a simple ride home. Frida and her boyfriend Alejandro boarded a wooden bus after school. They teased each other as always. She probably rolled her eyes. He probably laughed. Then everything shattered. A streetcar rammed the side of the bus and crushed it against a building. Wood exploded. Screams, bodies, chaos, and Frida, flung through the wreckage like a marionette cut loose, was impaled by an iron handrail. It entered through her left hip and tore out through her pelvis. Her spine fractured in 3 places. Her leg shattered. Her shoulder dislocated. Her foot twisted out of place. Her ribs and collarbone cracked. Her insides bled. She was just 18. When rescuers found her, someone draped a coat over her. Another noticed her skin sparkling. Not blood, gold. A bag of gilded powder had burst open in her lap during the crash, coating her broken body like dust on a saint. Frida was rushed to the Red Cross hospital. Surgery after surgery, pain layered on pain. Weeks passed with her encased in a plaster corset, her body refusing to obey, her dreams of medical school dissolving like sugar in water. But in that unbearable stillness, a new version of Frida stirred. Her mother strung a mirror above her bed. Her father gave her brushes. And in that silent crucible, unable to walk, unable to move, Frida Kahlo picked up a brush and began to paint. Not to escape, but to survive. The future she had once imagined. Donning a doctor's coat, tending to others, slowly unraveled with each passing day. Her body, broken in too many places to count, betrayed that dream. But within that stillness, something else began to move, not in muscle but in spirit. Her father, Guillermo, placed paintbrushes in her hand. Her mother engineered a crude wooden frame above the bed to suspend a canvas. A mirror, angled just right, reflected her face back at her, night and day. And there, in the shadow of shattered bones and unrelenting pain, Frida began to paint. What began as a way to pass the endless hours, half distraction, half defiance, evolved into something elemental. Her first muse was the only one she could reach, herself. Yet what emerged from the brush was not narcissism. It was necessity. The crash had destroyed her spine, but opened a portal into her psyche, her body's private language, and the uncharted territory of anguish and identity. The girl who once dreamed of mending others began, stroke by careful stroke, to stitch herself back together. Frida painted from inside a cage of plaster, iron, and silence. She couldn't walk, but her mind roamed with vivid clarity. What began as art therapy soon became a declaration. And that declaration was raw, unfiltered, electric. Her canvases didn't bloom with flowers or idyllic scenes. Instead, they burned with confession of pain, rage, sorrow, and survival. Her self-portraits came fast and often, not out of vanity, but because, as she later said, "I paint myself because I am so often alone, and because I am the subject I know best." Painted on tin and wood, inspired by retablos, Mexican devotional icons. Her early works took sacred visual traditions and turned them inward. She wasn't just praying for healing. She was documenting the wounds, making them holy. She painted herself as broken, pierced by metal, spilling tears, bound to surgical corsets or impossibly upright columns meant to symbolize her fragile spine. Her face stared out from every image, bruised, bloodied, sometimes laughing, but always unflinching. Her pain was never romanticized. It was dissected, rendered in vivid reds and barren browns, surrounded by symbolism and silence. But these weren't just paintings of suffering. They were portraits of survival. Frida dared to expose the grotesque and make it art. She transformed vulnerability into a kind of strength that was both unsettling and transcendent. Her brush became scalpel and incantation. Her canvas, a battlefield between flesh and spirit. What Frida was building wasn't just a visual diary. It was a revolution. Her style drew from folk art, anatomical diagrams, Catholic iconography, and surrealist dreamscapes. Yet it was wholly her own. Somewhere between the mythic and the medical, between Aztec roots and European philosophy, her art found its voice. By the time she was able to stand again, slow, unsteady, always in pain, Frida had already crossed a threshold. The aspiring physician had become a painter, and her art didn't just reflect her trauma, confronted it, dared the world to look. Frida Kahlo didn't flinch in the face of suffering. She painted it, mythologized it, and made it impossible to ignore. In doing so, she transformed agony into iconography, and herself into one of the fiercest, most original voices art had ever known. In 1928, as her bones continued to heal and her identity as an artist began to solidify, Frida Kahlo met the man who would ignite both her creative fire and her deepest wounds, Diego Rivera. She was 21, brimming with sharpness and defiance. He was 42, a towering figure in every sense. Physically immense, politically influential, and already a national icon for his epic murals. Frida had admired his work long before they met. His murals blanketed public buildings with vibrant stories of revolution, class struggle, and Mexican identity. But now she wanted more than admiration. She wanted his verdict. She climbed the scaffolding of the Ministry of Education and interrupted Rivera mid-brushstroke. Holding up her paintings, she asked directly, "Do I have what it takes?" Diego studied the pieces and replied, "Yes, and I don't say that out of politeness." What he saw wasn't refinement. It was raw honesty, a voice unshaped by convention, bursting with defiance, irony, pain, and visual poetry. What followed was not a love story in the traditional sense, but a collision. Frida would later say, "I suffered two major accidents in my life. One was the tram that ran me over. The other was Diego." They married in 1929, a match that baffled many. Diego large, unfaithful, world-renowned. Frida petite, sharp-tongued, disabled, but fiercely self-possessed. Her parents called it a union between an elephant and a dove, but the bond between them was alchemical, creative, volatile. Diego encouraged her art. He believed in her vision, her politics, her strength. Yet his infidelities were relentless, including an affair with Frida's own sister, Christina. The betrayal shattered her. In response, she took lovers of her own, men and women alike. Rumors would link her to Leon Trotsky and possibly even to Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939, but the pull between them remained gravitational. A year later, they remarried under new conditions. Frida kept her independence this time. Her own house, her finances, even her name. Their second union was less romantic, more pragmatic. A pact of shared history, mutual admiration, and creative symbiosis. Despite the heartbreaks, Diego never stopped championing Frida. He challenged her ideas, broke her heart, yet always saw her, not just as a wife, but as an artist of singular vision. Their relationship was not tranquil. It was revolutionary. In the 1930s, Frida followed Diego to the United States as he took on major mural commissions in San Francisco, Detroit, and New York. The journey exposed her to a nation grappling with the Great Depression, and one intoxicated with its own excess. America, to Frida, was strange and disconnected. She was unsettled by its industrial sprawl, its obsession with appearance, its wealth juxtaposed with desperation. In letters home, she mocked its vanity, its sanitized neatness, its lack of soul. She missed Mexico, its chaos, its colors, its contradictions. While Diego covered vast factory walls with revolutionary epics, Frida turned inward. She painted quieter storms, her own. Her canvases remained intimate, often painted on tin in the style of folk ex-votos. And from this period emerged some of her most searing self-portraits. These were not exercises in ego. They were acts of survival. With her body in constant pain, still reeling from surgeries and a traumatic miscarriage in Detroit, Frida painted her own flesh like terrain, bruised, bleeding, but undefeated. Her face in each painting remained composed, unflinching, yet the scenes around her spiraled in anguish. In Henry Ford Hospital, she portrayed herself on a hospital bed, tethered by red veins to floating symbols of loss. A fetus, a snail, surgical tools, a fractured pelvis. It was brutal, unflinching, visceral. This was not just personal grief. It was a revolution in portraiture. A woman exposing herself, not to seduce or please, but to tell the truth. Frida's art from these years was not designed for galleries or critics. It was for herself. Each painting was a confrontation with pain, with gender, with the expectations placed on women's bodies and emotions. She was no longer just Diego Rivera's wife. She was becoming Frida Kahlo, an artist who painted what others dared not even name. It was the medium itself. Frida's body had become a battlefield, but her art was the weapon she refused to lay down. Every painting from this time feels like a scream frozen in pigment, not for sympathy, but for truth. The broken column wasn't just an image. It was a declaration that beauty could exist beside agony. That resilience wasn't about smiling through pain, but staring it down. Her physical decline only intensified her inner fire. In 1953, when she was finally given her first solo exhibition in Mexico, after decades of being overshadowed by Diego and disregarded by critics, Frida defied her doctors to attend. She was so ill she couldn't walk. So she arrived in an ambulance, was carried into the gallery on a stretcher, and laid in a specially prepared bed placed in the center of the room. Guests gathered around her like acolytes at an altar. Frida, wrapped in silk, lipstick bright, eyes shining, greeted them from her horizontal throne. That night, her body may have failed her, but her spirit refused to miss her own revolution. Her art in those final years turned even more radical, politically, emotionally, and spiritually. She painted Marxism will give health to the sick, a surreal fusion of ideology and anatomy, placing herself in the arms of Karl Marx as if faith and medicine had finally merged. In Without Hope, she painted herself force-fed grotesque things, a commentary on the treatments she endured. Even as her leg was amputated and her world shrank to the limits of a bed, her vision remained vast. She never stopped creating, never stopped resisting, never stopped being Frida. In July of 1954, just days after painting her last work, a still life of ripe watermelons inscribed with the words "Viva la vida," Frida Kahlo died, officially of a pulmonary embolism, though some believe she may have taken her own life. Her final diary entry read, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." She was 47 years old, but Frida never really left. Her body may have been buried, but her defiant spirit lives on in every color-drenched canvas, every bleeding heart, every flowered headdress. In a world that wanted her to stay silent, she painted herself into eternity, loud, raw, impossible to ignore. She wasn't just a painter of pain. She was a portrait of power, broken, burning, and unafraid. Would you like to continue with a reflection on her legacy and how she became a global icon decades after her death? And when we look, really look, we don't just see Frida. We see everything she carried. We see a woman stitched back together with courage and color. A body that was broken but never bowed. A voice that refused to whisper. We see the Mexico she loved. Complicated, vivid, burning with memory. We see rebellion not as an act of rage, but of radical truth-telling. Frida didn't paint escape. She painted confrontation. And in doing so, she gave language to the unspeakable, to pain, to loss, to love that scars, and to the power of survival. She showed us that art is not just about beauty. It's about honesty, that politics is not just fought in streets, but on skin, in dreams, in pigments pressed into canvas by a trembling hand. Her life, as much as her work, challenged every convention of womanhood, of art, of nationalism, of identity. And today, her legacy doesn't live in museums alone. It lives in anyone who has ever been shattered and chose to create instead of collapse. In every artist who refuses to be categorized. In every woman who has stared back at the world and said, "I will not be reduced." Frida Kahlo didn't just paint reality. She became a new one. Viva la vida. Viva la Frida.